Bill Donahue, thanks so much for taking time to talk with us today.
My pleasure.
The idea of historical astronomy, what is it that we can learn by studying past scientific and astronomical discoveries?
Ancient Greeks were mathematizing the heavens in like the 4th century BC. Ptolemy had created, first of all, he had this very interesting preface, which was very modern, and was saying that we know something about where we see the planets and stars going. We're not really entitled to know anything else about that. That's all kind of speculation. It's theology. So what the job of astronomy is to create a mathematical model that will predict the things that we can see, which is really very modern. There are a lot of modern, like 20th century scientists like Dirac, who really said about the same thing. In a very simplified way, by studying those old astronomers, you can see how that approach developed, and you can include that in a curriculum that ordinary undergraduates can do, unlike a lot of quantum stuff, which involves a lot of complicated mathematics. So that's one side of it. And then another is that naturally there were people who came along and said, you know, I think we can actually learn more stuff about the stars than just creating mathematical models. Kepler was one of those, and his advances in astronomy were a huge, he set the research pattern for the next 100 years by saying, look, we believe that the Earth is one of the planets, so the planets must be like the Earth. So the job of the astronomer now, planetary astronomer, is to figure out how these things really are moving as physical objects. And that means we're going to have to deal with forces, and that means we're going to have to mathematize forces. Nobody had ever done that before, so he was just kind of making up a system. But you can see how he set the scene for Newton.
And up until this point in human history, the assumption, there are all sorts of assumptions, but one of the big ones was that orbits are circular. And it wasn't until 50 years earlier than that we thought, oh, well, the Earth is at the center of everything because we are at the center of everything. What a fascinating period of time, I think, for someone to study.
It was exciting. And interestingly, Kepler, I think, was just about the first of the second generation Copernicans. That is, his teacher, although his teacher taught Ptolemaic astronomy, he was privately a follower of Copernicus. And outside of class, he taught Kepler, he helped Kepler read Copernicus. So Kepler had a leg up on this. He already, practically as a kid as a freshman in college was studying Copernicus. And so he was a jump ahead of everybody else and thinking, what are the consequences of making the Earth into a planet? Then all these planets are like Earth, and what then? So,
how long did it take for this to sort of become accepted?
It was about 50 years. Descartes was really big. Galileo was big. Kepler was he didn't have such a popular following, but what he did was he set the research program for the next 100 years by saying, look, if the Earth is a planet moving around the sun, then the planets must be like Earth. So we've got a whole different kind of challenge in our physics. We need to be able, we know on Earth that things move because they get pushed and pulled. And it's not moving because they are made out of some magic substance that flies around in the sky. So we need to base our celestial physics, our explanations of planetary motion, on physical causes, which means you have to mathematize forces. And nobody really knew how to do that. Kepler didn't know how to do it either. He started making things up. He said, well, maybe it's kind of like the way a magnet works. And so he had this whole theory involving magnets. But even as he was working out the theory, he was saying, you know, there's some places where this theory just doesn't work, and I don't know how to fix it. So, and then he says, okay, so it's up to you guys out there who are reading this to figure it out. And Newton was one of those guys.
It changes everything. The study of historical astronomy and the translation work that you've done is something that fit into your career at St. John's, which is a great books institution. For people who aren't familiar with that, can you explain a little bit about the course of study and how your work and historical astronomy in general sort of fits into this?
Many scientists think you're not going to learn anything by reading old science. It may be entertaining, it may be interesting, but you're going to get wrong facts, and their approach is, what we're trying to do is to get a more and more accurate explanation of things. There are other people who think the job of science is not to find out the facts, but to try to come up with a way of understanding the universe. And facts are a part of that, but having the understanding is a huge dimension of that. So in studying old sciences, which is what we do at St. John's, we study old sciences. In chemistry, we redo experiments that were done hundreds of years ago. We look at the old observations in astronomy and try to understand what these astronomers were thinking. We are, in a way, looking over the shoulder of a really, really smart person, confronting questions that nobody had ever confronted before. And we can see how they went about understanding those things. When you're dealing with a modern scientific question, you're confronting something that nobody's ever seen before. So you've got the job of figuring this out. Now, if you've never done that before, you're not going to be in as good a position as somebody who has gone back and looked at how Newton figured things out, how Kepler figures things out, how Lavoisier figured things out in chemistry. You will approach modern problems by saying, you know, I've been through this a lot of times with a lot of really smart teachers.
At some point during your translation, you discovered that Kepler was sort of working backwards. He anticipated that people might not agree with this, and he wanted his case to be as solid as it could. This is sort of the discovery that a lot of people, the New York Times picked up on it, that sort of thing. Tell me about that, and how did you sort of realize, wait a second, this isn't doing what he says it's doing?
Well, it was just one chapter in Astronomia Nova. Towards the end, he had already done the major spade work in establishing what the general shape of Mars's orbit was, and how the forces had to work in order to create that shape. I could see from working through repeating his computations that he couldn't have done it the way he said he had done it. It must have been just a horrible mess as he was going through and fiddling with this number and fiddling with that number. And he came up with this final table, which was very neat and nice, and had all these positions of Mars laid out in a very orderly fashion. And I was wondering, how did he come up with, and I couldn't get them to come out until I took his finished theory that he worked out. So I realized he took his finished theory and put it in there. And I think what he was thinking was, if I had been able to do the computations that I was working on here, and if I could have done them all perfectly, I would have come out with all of these positions because I know that these are positions are the right ones because of the relation. So it's a complicated thing. It would not be regarded as legitimate science nowadays. But you have to remember that this is 1604 or something around there, and you have to cut him some slack.
What about that time attracted your attention, and what about these works?
There was just a huge change that happened then. Giordano Bruno, executed in 1600. He was a proponent of an infinite universe with the stars being possibly centers of other planetary systems, and so a very modern looking thing. He also had some very crazy ideas, like he was trying to convince the Pope that the Pope should abolish the Christian religion and go back to ancient Egyptian religion and all kinds of stuff like that. So it was understandable that he would have been tried for heresy and burned. But still, because Bruno was associated with those ideas, it was not regarded as all right to think that way, at least for the next decade or two. But you couldn't really suppress that kind of thinking once it was out of the box. By 1650, people were saying, this idea of Earth in the middle and the universe as a ball, that doesn't really make a lot of sense. We need to be thinking in terms of spreading things out and just trying to investigate the universe as we see it and not the universe as we imagine it. So in a period of 50 years, the whole universe changes. It's now reasonable to think of an indefinitely large universe. And what I figured out in studying this, I did my dissertation on it, was that the real impetus behind that had nothing to do with new phenomena or anything like that. It had to do with theology, largely.
Interesting. And you had said that a lot of this work is taking place in religious settings, whether it's seminary or a religious university.
At the same time, the 30 Years' War was going on. You had the Jesuit college movement. I think by 1650, there were something like 500 Jesuit colleges set up around Europe. So there were Jesuit colleges all over the place, and there were alternate educational movements going on that were often theologically based. And the Protestants had their own side on things, but they were by no means radicals. In fact, sometimes the Catholics were, like Descartes was educated in a Jesuit college. And a lot of the early Cartesians have that kind of background.
Okay. Is that the reason that people like Kepler worried that they would get in trouble for the way that they were thinking, or that there would be some sort of pushback? Obviously, they had seen what happened to Bruno.
Seen what happened to Bruno, and they had seen a little later what happened to Galileo, which was not as drastic, but he was under house arrest. It was just radically different.
Did all these scientists know of each other and know of the work that they were doing?
Galileo and Kepler kept an eye on each other. Galileo was more standoffish, I think because Galileo didn't really understand astronomy very well. He was, which sounds like a strange thing to say, the inventor of the telescope does not understand astronomy. But he was not able to accept Kepler's idea that the paths of the celestial bodies were not circular, and that you had to be constructing a mathematical theory of forces in order to make them work. He just couldn't wrap his mind around that. Kepler kept on writing to Galileo saying, you ought to do this and you ought to do that, and then he wanted to talk to you about so-and-so, and Galileo would keep on not writing back.
Unless he liked what he heard or read.
Oh yeah, yeah, well, when Galileo needed help, people with good credentials to look at his new telescope, Then he would write to Kepler and say, I sent a telescope over to Prague, and I hope you'll get a chance to look at it. And then Kepler was able to say, yeah, this thing really works.
When you found out that you were winning the award, or now, you know, as you think about it, what does it mean to you to have that recognition?
I was astonished that they would consider me, because it's usually to established academics, other people with distinguished academic careers, and I have had a very atypical career. I've never received tenure from anybody.
But like you said, it's that chance really, as you're going through Kepler's journals, to be in his head or over his shoulder.
Yes.
Seeing what he saw and thought.
It is, and unfortunately, it's not really so much what is current in history of science. But still, I think and I think a lot of people agree with this, that there's room for people who are really just wanting to study the ideas and understand how those ideas develop and how they make sense. And maybe even to try to help students get an appreciation for that process, because that seems to me to be one of the very best ways to learn science, is to be an apprentice to somebody like Kepler or Galileo or Lavoisier or whatever.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for taking all the time. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for doing this.